The snow fell silent that December night, but Iris Brennan's stream tore through Oak Ridge like a gunshot. She found him face down in the drifts behind the barn. Wyatt Mitchell, 18 years old, regional bull riding champion, bleeding into Montana's frozen earth. Blood spread crimson across white powder, steam rising from the wound on his jaw. His eyes were open, terrified, trying to speak through a mouth that wouldn't move. "Hank." Iris's voice cracked as she dropped to her knees. "Hank, help." The barn door slammed. Hank Mitchell stood frozen in the threshold, staring at his son the way he'd stared at his wife 18 years ago, helpless, watching death arrive early. Something yellow crusted around Wyatt's jaw, not blood, not pus, something else. Something that didn't belong inside a human body. The ambulance was 20 minutes away. Wyatt didn't have 20 minutes. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Along with the city you're watching from now, let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, Oak Ridge had felt like the center of Wyatt Mitchell's universe. The town sat in a valley where Montana's cattle country met endless Scotch, population of 3,000 if you counted the dogs, one main street, one high school, one medical clinic with faded linoleum and magazines from 20 to the nearest real hospital was 100 miles east in Billings, far enough that most folks learned to handle their own emergencies. This was ranching country, where men measured worth in calluses and silence, where asking for help meant admitting weakness. Oak Ridge raised its boys to be tough, to walk off pain, to bleed quiet. Wyatt Mitchell had been raised exactly right. At 18, he stood 6'1" with the lean muscle that came from dawn to dusk ranch work. A scar split his left eyebrow, a bull's horn at 14 giving him a permanent look of skepticism. He'd just led his high school to its first regional rodeo championship in over a decade, riding 8 seconds on a bull named Widowmaker while 200 people screamed his name. He lived on the Mitchell family ranch with his father, Hank, in a house that had belonged to Mitchells since 1947, 4 generations of cattlemen. The worn floorboards still held the footsteps of his grandfather, his great-grandfather, ghosts in the wood grain. His mother existed only in photographs and one embroidered handkerchief Wyatt kept in his pocket. Martha Mitchell had died when Wyatt was 3 days old. The official story was childbirth complications. That's what Hank had always said, and Wyatt had never questioned it. Hank Mitchell was 52 and looked 70. Ranch life aged you fast, sun damage, hard labor, the kind of loneliness that calcified around your bones. He was a man of few words, most of them practical. He drove a 7 Ford F-150 with 200,000 miles, refused to replace it despite the rust eating through the wheel wells. Every morning he made 2 cups of coffee, drank one, left the other at the empty place setting where his wife used to sit. 18 years of this ritual, the coffee always went cold. Hank wore the same blue flannel shirt every Sunday. It had been Martha's favorite on him. Then there was Iris Brennan, the girl who saw through all of Wyatt's cowboy posturing. Veterinarian's daughter, debate team captain, MIT bound, with a full scholarship in biomedical engineering, red hair in a perpetual ponytail, freckles across her nose, hands that smelled like antiseptic from helping her father with ranch calls. She'd been dating Wyatt for 2 years, loved him despite his stubborn silences. Maybe because of them, She drove her father's beat-up Chevy Silverado and kept a Zippo lighter in her pocket that she'd click open and shut when she was thinking hard. She'd never smoked a day in her life. The night Wyatt won the regional championship, Oak Ridge threw him a hero's welcome at Mac's Bar. The parking lot overflowed with trucks, country music bleeding through the walls, everyone wanting to shake the hand of the kid who'd stayed on Widowmaker for a full 8 seconds. Iris found him outside around midnight, leaning against her Silverado, looking up at stars so thick they felt close enough to touch. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah." He touched his jaw absently. "Bull caught me a little, just sore." She stepped closer, tilted his face toward the parking lot lights, a small scrape along his jawline, barely visible. "You should clean that. It's nothing." Famous last words of every stubborn cowboy ever. But she smiled, kissed him softly. "I'm proud of you. Thanks for coming." He meant it. Half the crowd inside was fair weather they'd cheered for him tonight, but wouldn't remember his name next week. Iris had been there for every practice ride, every failure, every time he'd limped home, bruised and questioning why he kept climbing back on. "Where else would I be?" She pulled back, studying his face in that way she had, like she could read the thoughts he never spoke aloud. "The scout talked to you, didn't he?" Wyatt nodded. "Professional circuit. Said they'd been watching me. Might have a real shot." "That's amazing." "Yeah." But something in his voice carried weight. "What? Nothing, just—" Dad worked this ranch his whole life. His dad before him. "If I go pro—" "You're allowed to want something different, Wyatt." "Feels like betrayal." Iris took his hand. "Your mom wouldn't want you stuck here out of guilt." He flinched at the mention. He always did. The mother he'd never known. The ghost that haunted every corner of the ranch. The reason his father hadn't smiled properly in 18 years. "Sorry," Iris said quietly. "It's fine." He squeezed her hand. "I should get home. Early feeding tomorrow." She drove him back in comfortable silence, radio playing soft. When she dropped him at the ranch house, she leaned over for one more kiss. "See you tomorrow." "Always." He watched her taillights disappear down the dirt road before heading inside. The house was dark except for the kitchen light Hank always left on. His father sat at the table, 2 coffee cups in front of him, one empty, one untouched and cold. "Hey, Dad?" Hank looked up, offered the smallest nod. "Heard you did good?" "Yeah, it went okay. Scout talked to you." "News traveled fast in small towns." "Yeah." Hank studied his son's face, saw the scrape. "Bull get you. Just a graze, nothing serious. Clean it proper. Don't want infection?" "I will." Hank stood, poured the cold coffee down the sink like he did every night, rinsed the cup, set it back in its place for tomorrow morning. "Proud of you, son." The words hung in the air, rare and precious. Wyatt felt something catch in his throat. "Thanks." "Dad." Hank headed upstairs. Without another word. That was their way everything important said, in the spaces between sentences. Wyatt went to the bathroom, looked at the scrape in the mirror. Small, insignificant, nothing that wouldn't heal in a few days. He splashed water on it, winced at the sting, dried his face. When he pulled the towel away, he noticed something. Small bumps forming along his jawline. Probably just irritation from the bull's hide. Razor burn. Nothing. He touched them gently, felt a dull ache. Nothing to worry about. He went to bed thinking about professional circuits, about crowds bigger than Oak Ridge's entire population, about a future that felt suddenly impossibly close. He didn't think about the bumps again, not until they started spreading. 2 weeks later, the bumps hadn't disappeared. They'd multiplied. Wyatt stood in the bathroom at dawn, razor in hand, staring at his reflection. What had started it as 3 or 4 small bumps now covered his entire jawline and crept down his neck. They'd turned from flesh-colored to an angry purple, raised and tender to the touch. He pressed one gently. Pain shot through his jaw. "Wyatt!" "Breakfast." Hank's voice carried up the stairs. He pulled on a bandana, the kind cowboys wore against dust. It covered most of his neck. Not suspicious half the ranch hands wore them daily. Downstairs, Hank had scrambled eggs and toast waiting. He glanced at Wyatt, noticed the bandana, said nothing. That was Hank's way. If his son wanted to talk, he'd talk. "Got that north pasture fence to mend today," Hank said, pushing the eggs around his plate. "Could use your help." "Sure thing." They ate in silence, punctuated only by the scrape of forks on plates. The empty chair at the table's head seemed to watch them both. Martha's ghost, a permanent third presence. Work on the ranch consumed the morning. Wyatt threw himself into it, hauling wire, digging post holes, anything to avoid thinking about the bumps that now throbbed with each heartbeat. By noon, his shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool August air. "You feeling okay?" Hank asked, wiping his forehead. "You look pale." "I'm fine." "Don't be stupid about it. Heat stroke ain't nothing to mess with." "I said I'm fine." The words came out sharper than intended. Hank's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Take a break. Get some water." Wyatt walked to the barn, found the water cooler, drank straight from the spigot. Cold water ran down his chin, and when he wiped it away, his hand came back with something else. Clear fluid, tinged lightly yellow, seeping from the bumps under his bandana. He pulled the bandana off, touched his jaw. Wet. The largest bump had started weeping. "What the hell?" he whispered. The barn radio crackled to life. Someone must have left it on. Sam Cooke's "You Send Me" drifted through the dusty air. His parents' song, the one they danced to at their wedding, according to the stories, the one Hank couldn't listen to anymore. Wyatt switched it off. He spent the afternoon avoiding Iris's texts. She wanted to come by after helping her father with a difficult calving. He couldn't let her see this. Not yet. Not until he figured out what was wrong. That night, he examined himself in the bathroom mirror, with the door locked. The bumps had darkened further, almost black at the centers. When he squeezed one, thick yellow pus oozed out. More than normal. He cleaned it with peroxide, wincing at the sting. Maybe it was cystic acne. He'd heard of guys getting that hormones, stress, teenage bodies doing weird things. The rodeo championship had been stressful. His body was probably just reacting. He found an old tube of acne cream in the medicine cabinet, applied it liberally. It burned. He gritted his teeth and waited for the pain to subside. Over the next 2 weeks, Wyatt developed a routine of concealment. Bandanas during the day, long sleeves despite the heat, turning away when people tried to look at him directly. He stopped going to town, stopped answering most of Iris's calls. The lesions spread to his chest and upper back. They hurt constantly now, a deep ache that made sleeping difficult. He started spending nights in the barn, claiming the house was too hot, that he needed to keep an eye on a pregnant heifer. Hank found the stained bandanas in the laundry, yellow and brown streaks that didn't look like dirt or sweat. He stood in the laundry room, holding one up to the light, his expression unreadable. He didn't confront Wyatt about it. In the barn one midnight, unable to sleep, Wyatt made a decision. He found an old mason jar on the workbench, cleaned it out. When the lesions drained, he'd collect it, see how much was coming out. Maybe that would tell him something. The first night, he collected maybe a tablespoon, clear to yellow fluid, slightly viscous. By the end of the week, the jar was a quarter full. Wyatt stared at it in the dim light of the single bulb hanging from the barn ceiling. The liquid had settled into layers clear on top, yellowish in the middle, and at the bottom, something grainy, like sand, like tiny particles of something that shouldn't be inside a human body. He screwed the lid tight and hid the jar under the workbench, behind a box of old tools nobody touched. Something was very wrong, but admitting that meant admitting weakness, meant doctors, meant the same hospitals that had let his mother die. Wyatt Mitchell had been raised to tough things out, to handle his own problems, to be strong. So he said nothing, and the infection continued its silent, patient work. By September, Wyatt had lost 15 pounds and could no longer hide it. Iris cornered him at the ranch on a Saturday afternoon, her Silverado kicking up dust as she pulled in hard and fast. She'd been patient for 6 weeks, texting, calling, giving him space he'd asked for. But patience had limits. She found him in the barn, mucking out stalls with his shirt collar pulled high and a bandana covering half his face. "Wyatt Mitchell, look at me." He kept working, pitchfork scraping against concrete. "I'm busy. I don't care." She crossed the distance between them in 4 strides, grabbed the pitchfork from his hands. "Look at me. Now." He had no choice but to turn, even in the barn's dim light. She could see how gaunt his face had become, cheekbones sharp as blades, eyes sunken. The bandana concealed his jaw and neck, but couldn't hide the purple discoloration creeping above the fabric line. "Jesus Christ!" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What's happening to you?" "Nothing. I'm fine. You're not fine. You've lost weight. You won't see me. You barely answer your phone." She reached for the bandana. "Let me see." He pulled back. "Iris, let me see." The moment stretched taut between them. Then slowly, Wyatt untied the bandana and let it fall. Iris's hand flew to her mouth. His jaw and neck were covered in blackish-purple lesions, some the size of quarters. Several were actively weeping. Yellow discharge crusted at the edges. The smell hit her a second later, sweet and rotten, like meat left too long in summer heat. "Oh, my God, Wyatt, how long?" "2 months, maybe 10 weeks. 2 months." Her voice pitched up. "You've had this for 2 months, and you didn't tell anyone. I thought it would go away." "Does it look like it's going away?" She was crying now, angry tears. "What were you thinking?" "I don't know." The words exploded out of him. "I don't know. Okay, I thought it was acne. I thought it was stress. I thought I could handle it. This isn't acne. Wyatt, this is... I don't even know what this is." She pulled out her phone. "What are you doing? Calling my dad?" "No." He grabbed for the phone. "Iris, don't... You need help. I don't need a veterinarian. You need someone. And you won't go to a doctor yourself. She stepped back, dialing. Dad, it's me. I need you to come to the Mitchell Ranch now. I know you're with the Hendersons' mare, but this is Dad. Just trust me, please. She hung up. Wyatt sank onto a hay bale, suddenly exhausted. Fighting took energy. He didn't have any more. There's more, he said quietly. More. He walked to the workbench, pulled out the mason jar from its hiding place behind the tools. Half full now, the liquid stratified into distinct layers. At the bottom, a substantial sediment of yellowish granules. Iris took the jar with shaking hands, held it up to the light streaming through the barn slats. What is this? What comes out of me? I've been collecting it. For how long? 3 weeks. She stared at the jar, then at him, then back at the jar. Her veterinary training kicked in despite her shock. She'd seen infections before, abscesses in cattle and horses, but nothing quite like this. The granular sediment especially, it looked almost crystalline. Wyatt, this isn't normal discharge. Something is seriously wrong. I know. Then why? She stopped herself. She knew why. Knew about his mother, about Hank's deep distrust of hospitals, about the masculine culture that taught boys like Wyatt that suffering in silence was strength. Cole Brennan arrived 20 minutes later, veterinary bag in hand. He was a compact man of 50, with weathered hands and eyes that had seen every injury a ranch animal could sustain. He took one look at Wyatt, and his expression shifted from confused to alarmed. Son, how long have you had these lesions? 10 weeks, give or take. Cole stepped closer, examining without touching. Have you seen a doctor? No, sir. Why the hell not? Wyatt said nothing. Hank had appeared in the barn doorway, drawn by the sound of an unfamiliar truck. He took in the scene, his son's exposed neck. Iris crying. Cole Brennan's serious face. What's going on here? Cole turned. Hank, your boy's got a serious infection. He needs medical attention. I can see that. Hank's voice was carefully neutral. What kind of infection? I'm not sure. But Iris said you've been collecting the discharge. He looked at Wyatt, who pointed to the jar. Cole took it, unscrewed the lid, smelled it. His face went still. He swirled the jar gently, watching the sediment move. Then he looked up. His expression grim. I've seen this before. Not in humans, but in cattle. We call it lumpy jaw. The technical term is actinomycosis. He pointed to the granules. These are sulfur granules. They're clusters of bacteria and calcium phosphate. The infection is caused by actinomyces bacteria. They're anaerobic, meaning they grow in low oxygen environments. Deep tissue, bone. Iris's voice cracked. In cattle, it affects the mandible most commonly, the jaw. Creates abscesses, drains these granules, causes the bone to deteriorate if left untreated. Silence filled the barn except for the distant lowing of cattle. Hank spoke first. You're saying my son has a cattle disease. I'm saying the same bacteria that infect cattle can infect humans. It's rare, but it happens, usually from contamination of a wound with soil or plant material. Wyatt, did you have any injuries around the time this started? Wyatt touched his eyebrow scar reflexively, then remembered the bull. At the championship, he caught my jaw. Just a scrape. Cole nodded slowly. That'd do it. Bulls carry the bacteria in their mouth flora. A scrape would be enough to introduce it. Can you treat it? Hank asked. Not me. He needs a human doctor. Infectious disease specialist, if possible. This requires surgical debridement, removal of the infected tissue and granules, plus long-term antibiotics. Months of them. No. Hank's voice was flat. No hospitals. Dad? Wyatt started. I said no. Cole stepped forward. Hank, I understand you have history with hospitals, but this infection will kill your son if it's not treated. It can spread to the lungs, the brain. Doctors killed my wife. Hank's hands were fists at his sides. They told me she was fine. Postpartum pain. They said normal. They said they sent us home, and she died 3 days later from an infection they missed. So don't tell me about what I have to do. The truth hung in the barn air like smoke. Wyatt stared at his father. What? Your mother didn't die in childbirth. She died because a doctor was too arrogant to listen when I said something was wrong. The confession shattered 18 years of careful silence. Wyatt felt the barn tilt around him. You told me she died giving birth. She died because of the birth. Hank's voice was hollow. 3 days after sepsis from an infection the doctor missed. He said she was fine, just tired, just normal postpartum pain. I believed him. I waited. By the time I brought her back, it was too late. Why didn't you tell me? What good would it have done? Hank looked at his son with haunted eyes. You were 3 days old. You needed a father, not a man drowning in anger at a system that killed his wife through negligence. Iris had stopped crying, watching this rupture between father and son with the helpless feeling of witnessing something private and terrible. Cole cleared his throat gently. Hank, I'm sorry. I didn't know the details. But this isn't the same situation, isn't it? Hank's laugh was bitter. Another doctor, missing something obvious. History repeating, Dr. Pierce hasn't seen Wyatt yet. And he won't. We'll handle this ourselves. You can't handle bacterial osteomyelitis with home remedies. Cole's voice rose despite himself. Hank, I'm telling you as a friend, this will kill him. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but it will spread to vital structures. He needs surgery and antibiotics that you can't get without a prescription. Wyatt spoke quietly. Dad, I'm dying. Everyone turned to look at him. I can feel it. Something's wrong inside me. Something eating away, and I'm scared. His voice cracked. I'm so scared, and I didn't want to tell you because you've already lost Mom, and I didn't want to disappoint you by being weak. But I can't do this alone anymore. Hank's face crumpled. In 18 years, Wyatt had never seen his father cry, had built his entire understanding of masculinity around Hank's stoic silence, his ability to absorb pain without flinching. But now, Hank Mitchell wept. You're not weak, Hank managed. God, son, you're not weak. I am. I let my fear almost kill you the same way it killed your mother, by trusting the wrong things, by being too stubborn. Iris moved to Wyatt's side, took his hand. There's an infectious disease specialist in Billings, Amelia Vance. She's one of the best in the state. 2 hours away, Cole added. I know her from a zoonotic disease conference. She's brilliant, particularly with unusual bacterial infections. Hank, let me call her. Hank wiped his eyes for a ruffler. What if she can't help? What if she's another doctor who doesn't listen? Then we find someone who will, Iris said firmly. But doing nothing is definitely killing him. We know that for certain. The silence stretched. Somewhere outside, a hawk cried. Cattle lowed in the distance. The world continued turning while 4 people stood in a barn, balanced on the knife edge of a decision. Finally, Hank nodded. Make the call. Cole pulled out his phone, stepped outside for better reception. Through the barn door they could hear his voice, professional and urgent, explaining the situation. Wyatt sat back down on the hay bale, suddenly lightheaded. Iris sat beside him, her hand still in his. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For shutting you out, for being too proud to ask for help, for... Stop! She squeezed his hand. You were scared, I get it. But Wyatt, I love you. That means I love you sick, scared, weak, whatever. You don't have to be strong for me. What about MIT? She'd been accepted months ago. Full scholarship to study biomedical engineering. It was everything she'd worked for since freshman year. I deferred, she said quietly. What? In August, when you started pulling away and I knew something was wrong, I deferred for a year. They'll hold my spot. Iris, no. Yes, because you matter more than a university. Because I wasn't about to leave for Boston while you were suffering alone in Montana. You can't sacrifice your future for me. I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm choosing. There's a difference. She turned his face toward hers. 1 year. Then we figure out what comes next. Together. Cole came back inside. Vance can see him tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. She's clearing her schedule. Tomorrow. Hank's voice wavered. She said, based on my description, this is urgent, time-sensitive. The longer we wait, the more tissue damage occurs. Wyatt felt reality closing in. Tomorrow, in less than 24 hours, he'd be sitting in another medical office, vulnerable and exposed, trusting his life to a stranger. What if I can't do it? He whispered. Hank knelt in front of his son, a gesture so uncharacteristic it stopped everyone cold. Hank Mitchell didn't kneel, didn't show vulnerability, didn't ask instead of command. But here he was, on his knees in the dirt and hay, looking up at his boy. Then I'll carry you, Hank said, the way I should have carried your mother back to the hospital when she said she was in pain. I won't make that mistake twice. The October sun was setting by the time Cole and Iris left. Hank made dinner scrambled eggs, the only thing Wyatt could eat anymore. Solid food hurt too much to chew. They ate in silence, but it was different than their usual quiet. This silence was full rather than empty, weighted with things said and unsaid. After dinner, Hank did something he hadn't done in years. He went to the hall closet and pulled out an old shoebox from the top shelf. Inside were photographs, letters, fragments of a life lived before grief. He sat at the kitchen table and opened it. Your mother, he said, pulling out a photo. Martha Mitchell on their wedding day. Red hair like Iris's, smile bright enough to light the room. She was 22 here, didn't know a thing about ranching, city girl, but she learned. Wyatt took the photo with shaking hands. He'd seen pictures before, but Hank never talked about her, never added context or stories or life to the frozen images. She was funny, Hank continued, always making jokes, even bad ones. She'd laugh at her own punchlines before she finished telling them. He smiled at the memory. She loved that Sam Cooke song. Played it constantly. Drove me crazy. Why did you stop listening to it? Because after she died, I couldn't hear it without falling apart. So I just stopped. Easier to avoid it than to feel it. He pulled out another photo. Martha, heavily pregnant, standing in front of the barn. This was a week before you were born. She was miserable, hot, swollen, tired, but she was so excited to meet you. His voice thickened. She died thinking she'd failed you, that she wasn't strong enough. Dad. But she didn't fail. The doctor did. I did. We all failed her. Hank looked at his son. I won't fail you. Not again. Whatever it takes tomorrow. Whatever Dr. Vance says. Whatever the cost, we'll do it. Because you're all I have left of her. Wyatt's throat closed up. He wanted to say something profound, something that would bridge the 18 years of silence between them. But all that came out was, I'm scared. Me too, Hank admitted. But we'll be scared together. That night, Wyatt tried to sleep in the barn as usual, but Hank stopped him. Sleep in your own bed. I don't want you alone tonight. So Wyatt went to his childhood room, crawled under blankets that smelled like detergent, and home, across the hall, he could hear Hank moving around, the creak of floorboards that had become a familiar nighttime rhythm for the first time in months. Despite the pain and fear and uncertainty, Wyatt felt something he'd almost forgotten. He wasn't alone anymore. They never made it to Billings. December came early that year, winter arriving in November, with temperatures that dropped below freezing and stayed there. By mid-December, Montana had been buried under 2 feet of snow with more falling daily. Wyatt had deteriorated steadily through October and November. Dr. Gerald Pierce, Oak Ridge's only physician, had finally examined him in late October after Hank reluctantly brought him in. Pierce was 65, hadn't updated his medical knowledge since the 90s, and diagnosed severe cystic acne complicated by secondary infection. He prescribed Accutane and antibiotics. Neither helped. By December, Wyatt had lost 30 pounds. His jaw had swollen visibly on the left side, distorting his face. He could barely open his mouth, surviving on protein shakes and soup. The lesions had spread across his chest and back, some the size of silver dollars, all of them draining constantly. The appointment with Dr. Vance had been rescheduled 3 times first because of Wyatt's deterioration. Then because of the weather, then because Vance herself had been called to a medical emergency in Great Falls. The new appointment was set for December 20th. They wouldn't make it. On the evening of December 18th, Wyatt went out to feed the cattle despite Hank's protests. It was his job. He'd done it every night since he was 12. Sickness didn't change duty. The temperature had dropped to 12 degrees. Snow fell in heavy curtains, accumulating faster than the plows could clear it. Wyatt bundled in layers thermal underwear, flannel, down jacket, gloves, the bandana he'd worn for months now, as much from habit as concealment. The cattle were restless, sensing the storm worsening. Wyatt moved through the familiar motions automatically, breaking ice on water troughs, hauling hay bales, checking on the pregnant heifers in the barn stalls. He passed stall 7 without thinking. It had been empty since his mother's accident there, when a nervous cow had kicked her in the abdomen while she was 8 months pregnant. She'd survived the kick. The infection that came later killed her. Hank never used the stall, left it as a kind of shrine to bad luck. Wyatt finished the feeding and started back toward the house. His jaw ached constantly now, a deep bone pain that never fully subsided. Oh, the cold made it worse, made his whole skull feel like it was being squeezed in a vise. Halfway across the yard, his jaw locked, not gradually, not with warning. One moment he could move it minimally, the next it was clamped shut, muscles in spasm, and no amount of effort would pry it open. Panic flooded through him. He tried to call out for Hank, but only produced a muffled sound through clenched teeth. His breathing became rapid and shallow. He could only draw air through his nose, and his sinuses were partially blocked. He stumbled forward, vision blurring at the edges, not enough oxygen. He was suffocating from the inside. His legs gave out. He went down face first into the snow, the impact jarring through his locked jaw with excruciating pain. Blood began flowing from the lesions, warm against the cold, melting the snow around his head into pink slush. He tried to push himself up, couldn't. His arms wouldn't obey. The sky up above him was dark, snowflakes falling into his eyes. He thought about his mother, about dying in the same place she'd been injured, about history as a circle, inevitable and cruel. I'm sorry. He thought, Dad, I'm sorry, Iris, I'm sorry. The world began fading, shadows creeping in from the periphery of his vision, then headlights. Iris's Silverado pulled into the yard, high beams cutting through the falling snow. She'd had a bad feeling all evening, that inexplicable intuition that something was wrong. She'd tried calling Wyatt 3 times. When he didn't answer, she'd driven over despite the weather. She saw him immediately. Wyatt! She was out of the truck before it fully stopped, running through snow that came up to her knees. She dropped beside him, rolled him onto his back. His face was blue-tinged, lips nearly purple. His eyes were open but unfocused, struggling to find her face. Yellow discharge mixed with blood covered his jaw and neck, shocking against the white snow. "Hank!" Her scream cut through the steeth. "Hank! Help!" The barn door opened. Hank appeared, backlit, and for a moment he didn't move, just stood there, staring at his son in the snow, and Iris saw the ghost of 18 years ago cross his face. "Hank, call 911." The words broke the paralysis. Hank ran, disappearing into the house. Iris tried to open Wyatt's mouth. Couldn't. His jaw was locked solid, muscles rigid. She could hear him trying to breathe through his nose, quick, shallow gasps that weren't getting enough air. "Stay with me," she begged. "Wyatt, stay with me. Please, please don't leave." His hand moved weakly, found hers, squeezed once. Hank came running back out. "Ambulance is coming. 20 minutes. He's not breathing right. His jaw is locked. Hank, I can't open it." Hank dropped to his knees beside them, and for the first time in his life, he prayed aloud. Not silent grace before meals, but real prayer. Desperate and raw. "God, if you're listening, don't take my boy. Please, I'll do anything. Go to any doctor, any hospital, pay any price. Just don't take him. Not like Martha. Not again." Wyatt's eyes found his father's face. He tried to speak and couldn't, but his eyes said everything. Forgiveness, love, goodbye. "No," Hank said firmly. "You don't get to give up. I won't let you. Your mother's last words were about you. She said, 'Take care of him, teach him to be gentle.' I failed. I taught you wrong. but I'm fixing it now. You hear me? So you hold on." Iris pulled off her coat, spread it over Wyatt to preserve body heat. She checked his pulse, fast and thready. His breathing grew more labored. "Where's the goddamn ambulance?" she sobbed. Hank looked at his watch. 15 minutes. He doesn't have 15 minutes. But there was nothing to do except wait, so they did, kneeling in the snow beside Wyatt Mitchell, holding him between them, trying through sheer force of will to keep him tethered to life. The snow continued falling, indifferent to human suffering, beautiful and deadly. Somewhere in the distance, finally, a siren began to wail. Oak Ridge Community Hospital was a 15-bed facility that handled ranch injuries, routine illnesses, and the occasional emergency. What walked through the doors that night was beyond anything the staff had seen. The EMTs wheeled Wyatt in on a gurney, oxygen mask over his face, IV lines already running. His vital signs were deteriorating, blood pressure dropping, heart rate elevated, fever spiking at 104 degrees. The triage nurse took one look at his jaw and paged Dr. Gerald Pierce, who was on call. Pierce arrived in rumpled scrubs, coffee-stained, looking every one of his 65 years. He examined Wyatt quickly, noted the locked jaw, the extensive lesions, the foul-smelling discharge. "Severe infection of the mandible," he announced. "We'll start IV antibiotics. Drain the abscesses surgically." "It's actinomycosis." Iris stood in the doorway, Cole Brennan beside her. She'd called him from the ambulance. "Sulfur granules. We showed you the samples 2 months ago." Pierce's face hardened. "Young lady, I've been practicing medicine for 40 years, and you've been wrong for 4 months." Her voice cracked. "You said it was acne. You said hormones. You said it would resolve. Look at him. Does that look resolved? Miss Brennan, I understand you're emotional, but this is not the time." Cole stepped forward, holding the mason jar. "Jerry, look at this. Actually look." Pierce took the jar reluctantly, held it to the light. The liquid had separated into distinct layers, and at the bottom a thick sediment of yellow granules glinted in the fluorescent lighting. "Those are sulfur granules," Cole said quietly. "Actinomyces israeli. I've diagnosed it in cattle hundreds of times. This is lumpy jaw. Jerry, human actinomycosis. The boy needs surgical debridement and long-term penicillin therapy." "I'm not taking veterinary advice?" "Then take mine." Everyone turned. Amelia Vance stood in the emergency room entrance, snow melting on her coat. Wire-rimmed glasses fogged from the temperature change. She was 43, short black hair, with the intense focus of someone who'd driven 2 hours through a blizzard because a veterinarian had called her with 3 words, "The boy's dying." "Dr. Vance." Pierce's voice was tight. "This is highly irregular. So is letting a patient deteriorate for 4 months." Vance crossed to Wyatt's bedside, began examining him with swift, competent movements. She palpated his jaw, checked the lesions, reviewed his vitals on the monitor. "How long has he been symptomatic?" "Since August," Iris said. "And you diagnosed it as what?" Vance asked Pierce without looking at him. "Cystic acne complicated by secondary infection." "Did you biopsy?" "Silence." "Did you culture the discharge?" More silence. "Did you order any imaging to assess bone involvement?" Pierce's face flushed. "I used clinical judgment. Your clinical judgment is going to kill this boy." Vance finally looked at him, and her eyes were cold. "This is actinomycosis. Advanced. The infection has spread to the mandible, likely causing osteomyelitis. His trismus indicates deep tissue involvement. He needs emergency surgery. I can handle—" "No, you can't. I've seen this twice in 20 years. One patient died. The other lost half his jaw. This requires specialized care." Hank had been standing against the wall, silent, watching this confrontation unfold. Now he spoke, voice raw. "Can you save him?" Vance turned to him. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to be honest. The infection is advanced. Surgery is high risk. His airway is compromised. There's significant tissue damage, and we won't know the extent of bone involvement until we open him up. Even with successful surgery, he'll need months of IV antibiotics. There's a 70% chance of survival with significant complications, 30% chance of poor outcome, and without surgery, 0% survival. The infection will spread to his brain or lungs within days." The numbers hung in the air. Terrible math, impossible odds, but not impossible. Hank looked at his son on the gurney, unconscious now, breathing through an oxygen mask, looking so much younger than 18. He looked like the baby Hank had held for the first time while Martha's body cooled in the next room. The baby who'd somehow survived his first 3 days of life without a mother, who'd grown into this stubborn, brave, foolish young man. "Do it," Hank said. "Whatever it takes, do it." Pierce stepped forward. "Mr. Mitchell, I must protest that Vance isn't on staff here, and this procedure—" "Then give her privileges right now." The hospital administrator had appeared. Drawn by the commotion, she looked between Pierce and Vance, understanding immediately the dynamics at play. "Dr. Vance, if you're willing to operate, we can grant temporary privileges. Dr. Pierce, you're welcome to assist or observe." Pierce's face went through several expressions: anger, hurt, pride, and finally something that might have been relief. He was 65, hadn't updated his skills in decades, and some part of him must have known he was out of his depth. "I'll observe," he said quietly. They wheeled Wyatt to the operating room. Vance scrubbed in while the anesthesiologist worked to secure his airway, complicated by the locked jaw and swollen tissues. It took 40 minutes just to get him intubated safely. Hank, Iris, and Cole settled in the waiting room. It was 2 a.m. The storm outside had intensified, wind howling against the windows. Pastor Dale Whitmore arrived at 2:30, someone having called him. He brought coffee and sat with them in silence. Other people trickled in as till word spread. Wyatt's coach, a few ranch hands, the teacher who'd sponsored the rodeo club. Small-town vigils were like this. Everybody showing up, nobody sure what to say. Hank sat in the same blue flannel shirt he'd been wearing for 4 days. Iris finally noticed. "Hank, there's a gift shop. They have shirts." "No." His voice was firm. "Martha died while I was changing clothes. I went home to shower, came back. She was gone. I'm not leaving." Iris understood then. The shirt was a vigil, a penance, a promise. Hours crawled by. 4 a.m. became 5, became 6. The storm finally broke around dawn. leaving Oak Ridge buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. At 7:18 a.m., Vance emerged from the OR. Her scrubs were stained, face exhausted, but her eyes were clear. Hank stood, couldn't speak, just looked at her with a question that had been burning for 8 hours. "He alive," Vance said. "Surgery was successful. We removed significant infection. 7 grams of sulfur granules and necrotic tissue. The mandible had extensive involvement. We debrided the bone, placed drainage tubes, started high-dose IV penicillin." "Will he be okay?" Iris asked. "He's critical but stable. The next 48 hours will tell us more. There's risk of sepsis, of the infection spreading despite our intervention. His immune system is compromised from months of fighting this, but we got most of it out. Can we see him?" "He's in recovery. Once he's moved to ICU. Yes, brief visits only. He needs rest." Vance sat down heavily, and for the first time, the professional mask slipped. She looked old, haunted. I'm sorry," she said to no one in particular. "I should have come sooner. When Cole first called in October, I should have driven down immediately, weather be damned." "Why didn't you?" Hank asked, not accusatory, just curious. "I had other patients. I thought—" She stopped. "That's not true. I was afraid. This case, it reminded me too much of my daughter, your daughter, Emma. She's 24 now. Has been in a persistent vegetative state for 15 years. Vance's voice was matter-of-fact, but pain lived in every word. "Lyme disease, misdiagnosed as growing pains. By the time we caught it, the bacteria had crossed into her brain. She had seizures, went into a coma, never woke up." "I'm sorry," Iris whispered. "I see her every Sunday, sit by her bed, tell her about my week, read to her. 15 years. She can breathe on her own, but she's not there. Not really." Vance looked at Hank. "Your son reminded me of her. Young, sick, doctors missing the obvious. I was afraid if I got involved and he died anyway, I'd have to live through losing her all over again." "But you came," Hank said. "Yes, because fear is a terrible reason to let someone die." At 9 a.m., they were allowed into IC. Wyatt lay in bed too, intubated, sedated, monitors beeping steadily. His face was swollen beyond recognition, bandages covering his jaw and neck, drainage tubes snaking out from under the dressings. Iris sat beside him, took his hand carefully around the IV lines. "You did it. You're still here, you stubborn, stupid, brave idiot." Hank stood at the foot of the bed, both hands gripping the rail like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "Your mother would be proud," he said quietly. "Not of you nearly dying, but of you fighting, of you finally asking for help. That took more courage than any bull ride." The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Outside the window, Oak Ridge lay buried in snow, the town sleeping off the storm. At 11 a.m. the alarms went off. Code blue. Wyatt's heart had stopped. Septic shock. The infection spreading through his bloodstream despite the surgery. Nurses and doctors flooded the room. Vance appeared, began chest compressions with mechanical precision. Hank and Iris were pushed into the hallway. Through the window, they watched Vance work, 1 minute of compressions. 2 minutes, shock paddles. Clear. Wyatt's body jolted. Flatline. Another shock. Clear. Flatline. Iris was sobbing against Cole's shoulder. Hank stood frozen, watching history repeat itself, watching his son die the way his wife had died. Despite everything, despite prayer and surgery and the best intentions, Vance didn't stop. She kept compressing, kept fighting, and Hank saw on her face what drove her. This wasn't about Wyatt anymore. This was about Emma. This was about every patient she couldn't save, every failure that haunted her. Third shock, clear. Beep, beep, beep. The heart monitor showed a rhythm, weak, but there. Vance stepped back, breathing hard. The team continued stabilization. After 5 minutes, she came to the hallway. He arrested. We got him back. But we need to monitor closely for brain damage from oxygen deprivation. Hank's legs gave out. He sat heavily on the floor, back against the wall, and for the second time in his adult life, Hank Mitchell cried. 3 days passed in the strange timelessness of hospital vigils. Wyatt remained unconscious, kept in a medically induced coma, while his body fought the infection that had nearly killed him twice now. Hank never left. The nurses brought him blankets, offered the family room with its fold-out couches, but he refused. He sat in the chair beside Wyatt's bed and talked to his unconscious son in a way he'd never talked when Wyatt was awake. He told stories about Martha, how they'd met at a county fair, how she'd never ridden a horse before moving to the ranch, how she'd burned dinner every night for the first 3 months and laughed about it every time. He talked about the morning Wyatt was born, how Martha had held him and said he had his father's stubborn chin. He confessed his failures, his silences, the 18 years of grief he'd let calcify into emotional distance. "Your mother's last words," Hank said on the 3rd night. She was fading, barely conscious, but she grabbed my hand and said, "Teach him to be gentle, not hard. The world needs gentle cowboys." I didn't understand then, thought she was delirious, but I get it now. She knew you'd grow up watching me. She was afraid I'd teach you to bury everything, to never ask for help, to die quietly rather than admit weakness. He wiped his eyes. She was right to be afraid. That's exactly what I taught you. And I'm sorry, son. I'm so damn sorry. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, Vance decided it was time to reduce the sedation and see if Wyatt would wake. The team gathered Vance, 2 nurses, the neurologist who'd been monitoring for brain damage. Iris and Hank stood against the wall, holding their breath. The sedation drip slowed. Minutes passed, 10, 20, 30. Then Wyatt's finger twitched. "Did you see that?" Iris whispered. His eyelids fluttered, opened slightly, closed, opened again. The breathing tube was still in, and the confusion in his eyes when they focused was heartbreaking. He tried to move, found himself restrained by IV lines and monitors and the tube down his throat. Vance stepped into his line of sight. "Wyatt, you're in the hospital. You had surgery. You're safe. Can you squeeze my hand?" His right hand moved weakly, wrapped around her fingers, squeezed. "Good. We're going to remove the breathing tube now. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it'll be quick. On 3, 1, 2, 3. The tube came out. Wyatt gagged, coughed, his whole body convulsing with the effort. When he could finally breathe on his own, his first word was barely audible. "Dad." Hank was at his side immediately. "I'm here. I'm right here." "Yeah, what happened?" "You collapsed. You had surgery. Dr. Vance saved your life." Wyatt's hand moved to his jaw, felt the bandages, the drainage tubes. His eyes widened with fear and question. "You had actinomycosis," Vance explained gently. "A bacterial infection in your jaw. We removed over 1/2 pound of infected tissue and granules. You're going to need months of antibiotics and physical therapy. But you're alive." 1/2 pound. His voice was raspy, throat raw from the tube. "Yes, your body had been fighting this for months. You survived something that should have killed you." Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. "Can I see?" Hank and Vance exchanged looks. The swelling was still severe, the bandaging extensive. He didn't look like himself. "Wyatt, maybe wait until—" Hank started. "Please?" Iris understood. She'd been carrying a small, compact mirror in her purse. She pulled it out, opened it, held it where Wyatt could see. The face in the mirror was a stranger's, swollen beyond recognition, purple bruising spreading from jaw to cheekbones, white bandages covering most of the lower face, tubes protruding from his neck. Only his eyes were recognizable, and they were sunken, haunted. "I'm a monster," he whispered. "No." Iris moved the mirror to show her own face beside his reflection. "Look at me. Do you see a monster?" "No." "Do you see someone who'd love a monster?" "No." "Then stop." She closed the mirror. "These scars just mean you survived. You fought something that tried to kill you and you won. That's not monstrous. That's heroic." Wyatt's hand found hers, gripped it weakly. "I'm sorry for shutting you out, for being too proud." "Shut up." But she was smiling through tears. "Save your strength. You can apologize properly when you're healed." Over the next days, Wyatt's condition stabilized. The fever broke. The infection markers in his blood work began dropping. Vance remained cautiously optimistic, but the reality of recovery was daunting. 6 months of IV antibiotics, physical therapy to regain jaw mobility, possible additional surgeries if the bone didn't heal properly. And then there was the other reality, the one nobody wanted to discuss but couldn't avoid. On December 28th, a representative from the hospital's billing department visited. The charges so far, $300,000, surgery, ICU care, medications, specialist consultations. And that was just the beginning. Hank's face went gray. "We have insurance." "Yes, and we've submitted the claims, but there's a notation in Wyatt's file about a pre-existing jaw injury. The insurance company is investigating whether this constitutes a pre-existing condition. The bull's horn scratch, that was 4 months before. I'm just telling you what they've flagged, Mr. Mitchell. It could take weeks to resolve." After she left, Hank sat in silence. Wyatt had drifted back to sleep. Exhausted from the morning's physical therapy session, Shiris had gone to the cafeteria. It was just father and son. The numbers hanging in the air between them. $340,000. The ranch was paid off, but land rich and cash poor. Hank had maybe $50,000 in savings. Another $30,000 in retirement accounts he could liquidate with penalties. The math didn't work. Cole found him there an hour later, staring at the wall. "Hank, the town's organizing a fundraiser. We've got commitments for about $80,000 already. That's generous. But," and Dr. Vance talked to the hospital administration. "They have a patient assistance fund. It's not huge, but it'll help." "Still not enough." Cole sat down. "Then we'll figure it out. Sell some cattle, take out loans, whatever it takes. I can't lose the ranch, Cole. It's all I have to leave him. The ranch doesn't matter if Wyatt's dead. You know that." Before Hank could respond, Wyatt's eyes opened. "Dad." "Yeah, son. Sell it." "What? The ranch? If you have to. Sell it." His voice was weak but determined. "Land's just land. You're all I've got that matters." Hank's throat closed. He reached out, took his son's hand, held it like he should have held it more often over the past 18 years. "We'll figure it out," he said finally. "Together." Outside, snow was falling again, covering Oak Ridge in fresh white. Inside the hospital room, 3 men who'd spent their leaks avoiding emotions finally let themselves feel everything: fear, love, hope, and the fragile possibility of redemption. Sometimes the hardest thing a parent can do is admit they were wrong. Hank Mitchell spent 18 years teaching his son that strength meant silence, that real men don't ask for help, that vulnerability was weakness. He built those walls from his own grief, from watching doctors fail his wife, from the fear that love only leads to loss. But when his boy lay dying in the snow, those walls crumbled. What saved Wyatt wasn't toughness or pride. It was his father finally saying the words that matter most: "I'm scared, I'm sorry, I skew, and I won't let you face this alone." That blue flannel shirt Hank wore for 4 days straight, refusing to change it because he'd been changing clothes when Martha died. That's the kind of vigil love keeps, the kind that says, "I won't make the same mistake twice. I won't choose pride over presence." And maybe that's what we all need to hear. Whether we're watching our children suffer or facing our own battles, that asking for help isn't surrender. It's the bravest thing we can do. Have you ever had to set aside your pride to save someone you love? What would you tell your younger self about the difference between strength and stubbornness? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.